Blog Talk Radio.
Archangels, ghosts, and Bigfoot, oh my. It's just another night for Supernatural Girls. Real stories, real answers to life's biggest supernatural mysteries. And now for another exciting interview with paranormal experts from this world and others. Here's your host, paranormal researcher Patricia Baker, on the one, the only Supernatural Girls.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Supernatural Girls Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker, and I'm here with my co-host, PK, all the way from Tucson. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, absolutely fabulous with the great guests we've got tonight. How could you be otherwise?
I know it. This is so exciting. We have Dr. Richard Gallagher back with us tonight. Brand new book. And we're going to bring him on in just a couple of minutes. And PK, what's going on? What's going on with numbers?
Well,
a little crazy.
Not a little crazy. The world's a lot crazy. It is so important for all of us to really be paying attention to what's happening this month. This month is a preview of next year. So you're getting a bird's eye view of what you may have to put some of course, try to put things together because everything is seeming to be upside down and backwards right now. Between the solar flares that we had on Sunday and Monday, it's really knocked everybody's socks off. So many different directions to go. And we're watching so many stories being told online because the year we're going into also will deal with secrets being made known. And boy, hasn't that been the case since the month of October started. Can't wait for this one to be. Oh, so it's going to be very interesting once we get into the first part of the year because right now that bridge period is taking everybody by storm because we're looking at people telling lie after lie, which is making you a little crazy with what they're making you look at one side of the street. It says yes. The other side of the street says no, and then they flip it on you. And you're going, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And it truly is. There's a lot wrong here. But looking forward to better things because the spiritual side is also going to be upgraded to the nth degree this coming year. So let's work on that side versus the downside that we know is out there dangling in front of us. Looks like a piñata. The good, the bad, the ugly, unfortunately.
Oh, gosh. Well, you know, it's interesting you bring up lies and stories being told because we had Corey Good on the show. It was a great show with Corey. He's a wonderful guest, and he had a lot of great information. And lately, somebody has started some stories, some gossip and rumors about Corey. And when I read this, I contacted Corey's management and spoke with them and said, hey, what's going on? I'm reading this stuff on the Internet. Now, listen, they can say anything they want on the Internet, right? And who knows if it's true or not, right?
That's right.
And this is just what you're saying, and that's just what you've been talking about. So I said to them, listen, we love Corey. We think he's great, and we were very concerned seeing these rumors being spread across the Internet. Do you want us to say anything to the audience tonight? Because our audience really responded well, with Corey's presentation, everything he had to say. So Debbie gave me something to read. So I'm going to do that on Corey's behalf. And so basically it's this. Corey is displeased with the gossip and rumors being spread, but is unable to comment on his legal proceedings due to a federal protective order being in effect, which is also in effect for the others involved in the proceedings. So that's what they asked me to share. Happy to do it. And, It's too bad when people try to ruin your reputation and they blast things across the internet. Very hard to combat it. So anyways, for those of you who know specifically what I'm talking about, you might want to let these folks know that have been posting those things that they should really check the source before they go ahead with it. And we're going to be having Corey back. He's coming back in December, and we will hear what he has to say about all of his exciting adventures then. But good guy, and our audience loved him, so we're happy to stand on his behalf. And tonight, yes, we have, as we mentioned,
together. I can't wait.
Yes, I know, really. Psychiatrist, board-certified psychiatrist, too, Dr. Richard Gallagher. He has a brand-new book. It's called Demonic Foes, My 25 Years as a Psychiatrist, Investigating Possessions, Diabolic Attacks, and the Paranormal. Now, again, I'm going to repeat this. He is a board-certified psychiatrist and a professor of psychiatry at New York Medical and a psychoanalyst on the faculty of Columbia University. He graduated from Princeton University, Phi Beta Kappa in classics, and trained as a resident in psychiatry at Yale University School of Medicine, the world's foremost scientific expert on the subject of diabolic attacks. He has been an active member of the International Association of Exorcists since the 1990s. He is the author, again, of the new book, Demonic Foes, My 25 Years as a Psychiatrist Investigating Possessions, Diabolic Attacks, and the Paranormal. And he lives in Westchester, New York, and he's here with us tonight. Dr. Gallagher, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patricia and PK. Nice of you to have invited me back.
Well, it's, as he said
pleasure.
Before we got live, yeah, it is our total pleasure to have you here. What a story. I mean, you have such an amazing background. You're highly credentialed, beyond highly credentialed. And here you are in the center of all of this going on around exorcism. And in fact, Doctor, we were reading that the Vatican is holding exorcist training courses because of a rise in possessions. Is that true?
Yes, there's certainly more interest in this sort of thing, and there probably are more possessions that happen for complicated reasons, although I think there's also more publicity and more people who sometimes mistakenly feel they're possessed. So for that reason, the church, and I don't speak for the church, but the church has decided that they want to appoint more exorcists as well as ensure better training.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, what's going on? And you said some of this is more about these cases being made known. But do you feel that there is something happening where there's more demonic forces in the world today that is creating this? Why all of a sudden is this worse than ever?
Well, I think you have to talk about different areas of the world. For instance, in a place like Haiti, some of the East Asian countries, there's always been a lot of not only belief in evil spirits, but a certain amount of dark experiences, let's call it. In the Western world, most traditional, you might say orthodox religious thinkers, mainstream religious thinkers, would say that with the decline in belief in mainstream religion, that a lot of people have turned to alternatives, sometimes dangerous or darker alternatives of the occult, and for that reason, some people feel there's more of these type of cases that we're talking about, not only possessions and oppressions. Of course, at the same time, I, as a psychiatrist, when I started getting involved in this about 30 years ago, we were all well aware that sometimes there was exaggeration and, people just imagining they were possessed or imagining they were Satanists all over the place. I mean, that still exists in this country to some extent. And, we know from the news that, there are these conspiracy theories about Satanists all over the place. But, for better or for worse, I think I've had to deal with some of the few exceptions to that rule. But one always has to be a little careful that you don't exaggerate or sensationalize this whole subject either.
Exactly. Now, this is a very unusual subject for traditional psychiatrists. So what was it that got you interested in this whole field?
Well, I was brought up Catholic, and I certainly, at Princeton, I certainly sort of majored in classics and history. So I developed some awareness of the pervasiveness of, beliefs in what we would now call the paranormal and spiritual experiences throughout history. But I didn't really volunteer for this work. About a little more than 25 years ago, after I finished my residency in psychiatry at Yale, I took a job with Cornell Medical College. And one day early on, when I was an attending there, I had a local priest who was actually a prominent exorcist, and he walked into my office and introduced himself and said, Dr. Gallagher, I know you're an academic psychiatrist and a Catholic believer, so, I'd like your help on evaluating a case that I think is demonically attacked. And, I said to this very pleasant but somewhat rumpled looking guy, I said, well, Father, with all due respect, I don't, I think people can get carried away with that stuff. And he said, well, then you're the perfect man for the job. So that's how I got introduced to the field. And, he introduced me to a woman he wanted my evaluation. This is a woman who was, in his view, literally being beaten up by spirits. She's not someone who had, got involved in the occult. In fact, she was a very, she was a very wonderful person. But, for different reasons that one can speculate about, she became a target of evil spirits. And people who knew her, including her husband, described just watching her literally seeming to be pummeled in her house by evil blows. And I was a little skeptical in the beginning. She had bruises. We had to do some lab tests. But eventually I came to believe that this was the, even as a scientist, which all doctors should be to an extent, I came to believe that this was a genuine, what we call, or not a possession, but what we call an oppression. And after that, these two of these exorcists who, at the time, there weren't that many Catholic exorcists in the United States. Two of these exorcists, enlisted my help in evaluating and assessing, many, many other people. Now, some of those people were mentally ill. Some of those people were just very imaginative and were not possessed. But a fair amount over the 2.5 or so decades that I've been doing this work, now being asked to consult on cases all over the world, all over the globe, I certainly have seen more than my share of cases.
That's fascinating. Now, the woman that you talked about, that was Maria, right? In your book that you wrote about?
Yeah, I mean, I never used.
Getting beaten up.
I always, yes, that's what I called her in the book. The only thing that is made up in the book is, I don't identify where anybody comes from, and I don't identify their actual name for reasons of confidentiality. Absolutely. But every other fact in this book that you were kind enough to mention, Demonic Foes, everything else is completely accurate. And, it's somewhat of a sober book, but I certainly wouldn't have written the book if I was making things up. But her name was Maria, very sweet woman. I mean, I can mention she had a Mexican American background, and she was from out west. And in her culture, there were things like brujos, which are sort of male wizards and that sort of stuff. And she believed that somehow she had run afoul of somebody, and this evil attack upon her had occurred. That's a pretty hard thing for certain people to stomach, but it's certainly a very widespread belief around the world.
It is, indeed. We've heard a lot about that. Yeah. And she was just being beaten up by invisible fists, right? There was no discernible entity that anybody saw, but these bruises formed on her body.
All these cases are, not to mention a little weird, all these cases are different, and in her case, I mean, there are people who claim to see spirits, and this is where you have to rule out, people who hallucinate or something like that. But in her case, yes, she could be lying in her bed, her husband and her friend watching, and everyone would experience as if, some kind of invisible force was punching her, and they felt incredibly helpless, which is why eventually they did seek the help of the church, and, somewhat remarkably, at that point in my involvement in this sort of thing, eventually those prayers and her own spiritual efforts seemed to, convey to her a type of protection so that this stuff disappeared. It was a pleasure to see the couple afterwards, joyous and thankful.
Yes, and she was quite religious, right? You wrote about that too. That she was very.
She was religious, and there is sometimes a misconception, and almost like sometimes a blaming of people when they're demonically attacked. But it is common. Well, I won't say it's common. All this stuff is rare, so I don't want to act like I'm ever saying these phenomena. Primarily, I'm talking about oppressions and the even more uncommon possessions. This stuff is rare, so anybody who sees them all the time, is probably mistaken. Having said that, people who get attacked are often people who have turned to something dark. They may have turned to outright evil behavior. They may have turned to occult groups that are dark in themselves, or unwittingly so, are drawing on powers that are beyond what they think they're dealing with. But it is also true that sometimes, even more rarely, and I would use Maria as a good rare example, that evil spirits also hate people who are very spiritual and very holy. In the history of religious figures throughout history, for instance, some of the great saints, have reported being attacked by spirits too. Now there is a kind of difference, because often, the holy people, take it as a kind of almost penitential thing, and they're upset by it, but they take it as something that they keep their peace about, remarkably enough. Maria was clearly disturbed by this. She wanted to get rid of it, but it did not shake her belief in God or something.
That's great. So she maintained her connection. Now, can we talk a little bit about that very famous movie, The Exorcist? Now, that was based on a true story, right?
Right. Yes, that was, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I've studied the true story. There are numerous books about it. There are always people who in my opinion, take pot shots at those stories and claim that, things were exaggerated. But, I did know some people who knew the priest who were involved in that, and it originally was based on a boy, and a 12-year-old boy. Now he had an aunt who was in touch with deceased souls, in her view, and that, look, I know people have different beliefs about that, but that can lead sometimes to a dark outcome. And all of a sudden in his house, the witnesses, all kinds of strange things would happen. And eventually he became possessed. Now, William Peter Blatty, who became aware of that case when he was a student at Georgetown, eventually wrote it in a fictionalized form about the character that he made into a female, Reagan. Some of the details in the movie were accurate, but there was a lot changed too. Blatty had actually read a very famous book, which not many people are aware of, but it was by a German historian who wrote about possessions existing all throughout history in all cultures. I mean, it's truly a magisterial work. And so Blatty had read that book. It was by a guy named Professor Osterreich, and he incorporated elements of other cases in the movie too. So the movie clearly had a fictionalized aspect to it, but it was very much based on this 12-year-old boy at its core. And it took a while, but he was eventually he was originally from Maryland. All this is public knowledge at the moment. He was originally from Maryland, and later he was brought to St. Louis, where a couple of Jesuit priests did a series of exorcisms, and he was eventually delivered, like Reagan in the movie.
Gosh. It's an incredible story. I went to Boston College like a million years ago, and some of the Jesuits that were there at the college talked about being involved with that case, and they said it really was terrifying. They said if you saw what we saw, you would have run out of the room and all the way back to wherever your hometown was, because it was that terrifying. So you talked about, some of the things in the movie were absolutely accurate, that they did happen. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, he had these, apparently he had these marks on his skin at times, which would appear, I think in the movie the character Reagan, has this skin marks that say "help me" or something like that. Right, yeah. He had different messages on his skin, and what was most dramatic was some of the stuff during the exorcism. It was reported to me that he did levitate during an exorcism, that he also spoke foreign languages, including Latin. I've certainly seen exorcisms where, people speak foreign languages and, very strange things happen in the room, as did in his case, and in fact, even in his house. And there were multiple witnesses to that sort of stuff. I've never seen a levitation myself, but I write about a case in the book of a woman who was an outright Satanist. Again, I went into it a little skeptical because I was aware of this hysteria about Satanism at the time, but this was the real deal. Now, I didn't see, even though I've been to a lot of exorcisms, I didn't see her exorcism. But, about 8 people reported to me that for about a half an hour she levitated too, like the character of Reagan in The Exorcist. Talked over the years, including, in my many trips to Europe, I've talked to people in different countries that they have witnessed levitations too. So, these are the kind of things that the movie reflected, which, strange to say, also exist in reality.
Yeah, it was a sensation when it came out, that movie, and obviously people are still talking about it. Yeah, it was a big deal.
It was an extremely popular movie. It was one of the highest grossing movies of all time, adjusted for inflation. And, it was rated the number one horror movie of all time. And I think that's because, obviously you go to a horror movie, and you even read some books on Satanists and stuff, and there's often tremendous exaggeration. But since people knew this was based on a real case, it really did scare a lot of people.
Yeah, it did.
I remember it was my mother of all people. Oh my God.
Oh, gee,
incredible.
Well, it was very well done, very well acted.
If I can just say one more thing about that movie.
Of course.
At the end, the demon is shown to jump into the priest, who then, either goes berserk or, intentionally jumps out the window to get rid of the demon and dies. It's interesting, even that was based on a very famous case in France about 300 years ago, which was in Osterreich's book, and I'm sure Blatty took it from the book. It was about a priest who had been working with a bunch of nuns. This was a very famous case in French history. It was called, I actually played a basketball game near there, that town of Loudun in France, and Aldous Huxley wrote a famous book about that, and he was somewhat of a skeptic, but he wrote a famous book called The Devils of Loudun, which was made into a movie. Long story short, the main exorcist in that nunnery also invited a demon to attack him instead, and was seriously assaulted by demons, for most of the rest of his life. So again, you can see how Blatty took some details not only from the 12-year-old boy, but also from other, historical cases, and made a quite a compelling movie out of it.
Yeah, it was pretty brilliant. Now, you did write in the book that this little boy was basically saved, and he went on to have a normal life after this.
Yes, he did. And, he became some kind of businessman. He actually died not that long ago. And, his character was eventually publicly identified. So, everything I'm talking about is on the public record at this point. Originally, he was given several pseudonyms, but eventually investigators, tracked him down, and I don't think he was too happy about that. I don't think he really wanted to become such a public figure. But apparently, he led a fairly normal life.
Yeah, that's just such good news. Now, when priests do exorcisms, we're not used to the truth about this because we watch stuff on TV that's dramatic and may or may not be real. So what happens? I mean, do they use holy water? Do they use certain passages in the Bible? How does this work?
Yeah, it at least in the Catholic Church, and of course it's, there are many Protestant exorcists as well. And in fact, there are exorcists in most religions. You can talk to Muslims who have imams who attempt to drive out evil spirits. The Catholic Church probably has the most organized way of working with these individuals, and so they're often called upon. I tend to think they're the most effective, but that's my own view. So in the Catholic Church, there was a famous manual about 300 years ago called the Roman Ritual, and that kind of codified prayers, Bible passages, procedures that the Catholic Church wanted people to use in a certain exorcism rite, and it's been modified several times, but it's still used. And in addition to those prayers, people People will have a crucifix. People will have holy water, which often disturbs the spirits no end. And it is kind of worked out. Having said that, every case is a little bit different too. So as the priest is commanding the spirit to leave, there are different scenarios. Not every exorcism is successful. Sometimes exorcisms take a long time. But I've been to quite a few, and I've seen quite a few successful ones.
Yeah, that's
wonderful.
Again, very good news about that. Now, do people have to be restrained? The people that are the focus of this?
Yes, often they do have to be restrained. I tell the story in the book about an inexperienced exorcist who happened to be a Protestant deacon, and he dealt with a woman in the book I call Barbara, and she was a woman who had, unfortunately, as a young woman, had gotten involved with a group of local Satanists in her neighborhood. She became possessed, and when it became obvious that she was possessed in her Protestant church, a deacon in that church, who unfortunately didn't have much experience, started to, get a group together and pray over her. When the demon manifested itself, because it's not manifesting itself 24/7. It comes and goes.
Mm-hmm.
At least manifests itself in an interrupted way, and under the prayers will often manifest itself, or is forced to. And so this 90-pound soaking wet woman, all of a sudden, she was not restrained and jumped up, attacked the deacon, literally. Again, I didn't witness this, but many witnesses corroborated it. Literally threw the deacon, who was about a 200-pound guy, across the room. So
wow!
That's the kind of extreme strength. Which look, I mean, there are psychiatric patients who, when they're manic, can seem very strong, but nothing to that degree. So exhibiting strength far beyond what a human could do, or having abnormal movements, in addition to speaking foreign languages, or clearly knowing hidden information about people. Those are some of the classic signs that the Roman ritual, suggests people look for in order to kind of prove that there's a foreign entity involved, and you will see that. I've seen all that stuff many times.
No, it also it reminds me when I watch this dramatic television around this. They talk a lot about how important it is to get the demon's name. So is that an important part of the exorcism, where they say, "Tell me your name," and they insist on hearing the name? Is that important?
Well, I'll tell you why I think it's significant. And yes, it is a part of, the procedure, you might say. So what demons try to do, what evil spirits try to do, and it's kind of funny if you think about it, or dramatic, maybe a paradox. On the one hand, they want to attack and intimidate certain people. There's no question about that. On the other hand, strangely enough, they seem to want to hide and confuse people. So what will happen is, even during an exorcism, when people are aware that something, evil and spiritual is going on, the demons will characteristically lie. They may say, I'm a dead soul. They may say, I'm Judas Iscariot or Hitler or something, or I'm, Uncle Jimmy, the evil uncle in the family. So they characteristically lie, because in a way they like attacking, sadistically intimidating people, and also corrupting people if they can, but they sometimes don't want to really reveal themselves. So what happens is, when the exorcist through the prayers, ultimately, any good exorcist is going to say, this is not me, this is by the power of our Lord. Any exorcist is going to try to get the demon to tell the truth and to say who it really is, and that it's an evil spirit. And the demons don't really want to do that. So when the demon is eventually forced, in successful series of exorcisms, when they're forced to tell their name, in effect is a kind of unwilling submission to the power of the exorcist, to the power of the church, to the power of God, ultimately. In other words, they're forced to submit or subject themselves to a stronger power. Now, in certainly in the Christian religion and in some of the older Jewish beliefs, Muslims belief, the monotheistic religions all say that, God is much more powerful than Satan and evil spirits, That's the constant teaching, which I believe. So, but the demons don't want to really submit to anything beyond themselves. That's kind of how they became what they are. They want their own realm of freedom, you might say. So when they're forced to actually admit who they are, that's when you begin to be optimistic, because that they're having to submit to a higher authority than whatever authority they're already under, which is usually believed to be Satan.
That is so interesting. So it is important. Well, I'm so glad that you answered that question, as I've thought about that a lot.
Let me tell you a related story that many of your viewers may be interested in. So I dealt with another woman. I forget the name I give her in the book, but I always give her pseudonyms. I'm going to call her Sophia just for the heck of it. So Sophia came to me, and she was also a very lovely woman. And she came to me because the priest. A lot of times, the way I see people is, a priest will send them to me when they want a medical opinion. And she said to me, Dr. Gallagher, the priest sent me. This was a priest I think I knew too. And she said, I told the priest that I was hearing from angels. And I said, were you seeing angels? No, I wasn't seeing angels. I was just getting a message from them. And I asked, being a psychiatrist, I asked, how did she experience that, and what kind of a person she was. And she said, well, it's not like, a schizophrenic person. I don't hear it with my ears. It's just a very powerful message in my mind. And, this seemed like a perfectly sane woman. It didn't seem like her imagination. I did ask her, if anybody had seen if medication would help her. And she said, yes, I tried it, and it did no good. And I told that doctor it wasn't going to do any good, and I was right. And so I said, so you've already been through that? She goes, yes. And I said, and you're absolutely convinced that you're getting a message from angels? She goes, well, that's the thing, doctor. I don't really think that they're angels. And I said, why is that? She said, well, I'm not important enough for angels to talk to me. And, I don't think that they would give me this message, this mission. They wanted her to, sort of announce something to the world. And she said, that's not who I am. I don't think that angels would pick me. So I was impressed by her, common sense and her humility. And I said, well, why don't you continue, praying about this with the priest and come back in a month and we'll see what happened. She came back a month later and she said, doctor, you kind of predicted this, I think, but, these messages have changed. And I said, well, Sophia, what are they telling you now? She goes, well, now they're saying that they're dead souls that dead souls are talking to me, and you know how common that sort of thing is. And I said to her, well, Sophia, what do you believe about that? And she said, well, I'm a little skeptical because I know in the Bible there's some discouragement of that sort of thing. This is why I said your viewers and you two may be interested in this story, at least in certain cases. And so I said, well, continue to go back and talk to the priest and pray about this, and let's see what happens. And about a month later, she contacted me and she said, well, doctor, now they're saying that they're evil spirits. And I said, so what did you wind up believing? And she said, well, I think they originally pretended to be angels, then they pretended to be dead souls, then they finally were forced, I believe, that this was our belief. I mean, it is my belief too, that they eventually, had to declare themselves to be evil spirits. It reminds me a little bit, if you guys have ever heard it, have you heard the word Dybbuk? You know what a Dybbuk is?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. A Dybbuk is, especially it was in the Jewish tradition, that they were thought to be wandering souls who, maybe come back to avenge something or to possess somebody. Now, most of the, Catholic experts that I know, as well as, quite frankly, myself, we feel that evil spirits often pretend to be, dead souls. I mean, there are some people, some exorcists in certain religions who, do think dead human souls can possess people. I personally do not believe that, and it tends to be not the belief of, most Catholic exorcists. So anyway, that's a humbling story if you think about it.
It is. And so what happened? What happened with this lady? I mean, she was very conscious of what was going on, and she was logical about how she was approaching it. So
I was impressed.
Again,
this was not. I mean, she was a sensible person. She was not a well-educated person. She was a humble person. She was, taking care of her family and everything. She was, kind of a salt-of-the-earth person, we would say. And she eventually, continued her own prayers because people's own prayers are important too, as well as had the prayers of the church, and eventually that all disappeared. Mm-hmm. So she, like Maria, had a good outcome.
That's excellent.
That's wonderful. Yes.
Now, you mentioned you've seen? I'm sorry. Go ahead, PK. You got a question?
I was just going to ask if certain religions have more of a affinity for this type of thing than others.
Do certain people?
Yeah, certain religious groups. I think this sort of thing happens all throughout history. I mean, I have a chapter in the book where, I mention that throughout world history, all different cultures have experienced this stuff. Sometimes people will say to me, well, how come these possessions only happen in, fundamentalist Christians? And, I guess they get the most publicity in the United States, but I said nothing could be further from the truth. I said, in fact, if you have no religion, and you turn to something evil or something like that, you probably have more of a risk of getting this, and you don't know what to do about it. At least most sort of Christians or Muslims or something, they'll try to get the help of their clergy. But if you don't have any kind of belief in that sort of thing, you feel you're much more on your own. But, all throughout, other religions in history, shamanism and, different pagan religions, I mean, this stuff has always gone on. And that's why, I mentioned this German professor who did a mammoth, 700-page survey of this sort of thing all over the world. And he concluded that, the similarities of
in this case, possessions, the similarity of possessions throughout all these different cultures is striking, and it indicates that whatever people wind up believing about these things, that something almost universal is going on.
That's amazing. And then for the people that possessed or oppressed, and it doesn't work for them, the exorcisms, the prayers, I mean, have you witnessed that also?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Not everybody is delivered, and even some decent people who maybe have changed their life from getting involved in occult and evil stuff to becoming much more wonderful, devout people. They can be possessed for years. I mean, I've seen a number of exorcisms that in one session the person was delivered, and others that go on for a long time or even, are never delivered. Now, one of the cases I write about in the book was a woman from an Hispanic culture outside the United States, and she had a mother who assigned a spirit to her, and this woman always kind of resisted it largely, but did become possessed, and then became a very devout religious person, and she was delivered in 2 sessions, whereas the character that I highlight in the book is actually going to be a movie made about her. I call her Julia, the Satanic Queen. She was literally the high priestess of this rare satanic cult. Again, forgive me for mentioning once again that, there has often been, and even when I started, a real panic about Satanists around every corner. I do not believe that's the case. But this woman, who I call Julia, was the real deal. Now, she was, again, not a very educated person, but, actually a quite intelligent, thoughtful person. And when she came to the church before she was sent to me for evaluation, she knew she was possessed, and the priest knew it too. And the reason that she was sent to me, and the priest required this to happen, is because she was very ambivalent about how to deal with her situation. Because on the one hand, you can imagine most people don't like being possessed. On the other hand, she didn't really want to stop her satanic practices. I mean, this was a woman who literally worshipped Satan, and she felt she got a lot of gifts out of it. In fact, she said to me, "People think I'm gifted. I'm not gifted. This is all from Satan." I think she was very realistic about that. And she was, she claimed to me at one point she was kind of the high priestess of the cult, and there was a male leader of the cult who was the high priest, and she was kind of in love with him, and she was also afraid of leaving the cult. So you can see that this was a very conflicted woman. She wanted to be rid of the possession, but she didn't want to leave the cult, or, strangely enough, she didn't even want to give up her, worship of Satan. And of course, we all told her, "Look, Julia, if you don't do that, you're never going to be delivered." And so this is a woman who had, the very dramatic manifestations that I talked about during the exorcisms, levitation, et cetera, speaking foreign languages, fighting against those restraining her for hours in a way that, the witnesses felt was just beyond human capacity. But she was never delivered, precisely because she never renounced her involvement in the cult and her occult practices. So it depends on the case. What Hollywood gets wrong is they sometimes act like it's all magic. And if you get the proper witch doctor, and the witch doctor says the right mumbo jumbo prayers, and finds herbs and roots to heal the problem, everything's going to go away. It doesn't really work that way. These people get delivered not only because of people's prayers, and exorcism ultimately is a prayer. Again, it's not the exorcist who does the deliverance, it's God ultimately. But the prayers are very important. Exorcisms are very important. But just as important is the inner spiritual efforts of the individual. So, the woman I call Barbara, this woman I think I call in the book Anne, they really worked at getting delivered, and they were delivered. Whereas someone like Julia, the satanic queen, we call her, Hollywood is going to make a movie about this woman because it's such a dramatic story that I highlight in the book. She was the real deal, the rare Satanist. She was never delivered, and it was very obvious why she wasn't, because she never renounced her evil ways.
Wow. Now, as I recall, you had some paranormal experiences that happened around this situation with Julia when you were at your own home.
Yeah, I mean, I never felt directly attacked or like, I saw any spirit or anything. Nothing like that has ever happened to me. But it started out, I observed a number of her paranormal abilities. We can get into that if you want. But it started out that I hadn't met her yet. I mean, the priest wanted to introduce her to me, and, I said, well, we'll work it out. You can come to my office in a few days or something. So I was in the bedroom, with my wife, and, we were asleep, and all of a sudden we got awakened, about 3 a.m. or so, and we had two relatively placid cats, and they would lie at the end of the bed. And, they were well-behaved cats. And all of a sudden, they were scratching each other and smacking each other and screeching. And, we couldn't figure what was going on. It woke us up, and we had to actually separate the cats. So, we thought, well, maybe they ate something bad or something. Who knows? But what happened the next morning is, and I was annoyed at the priest for doing this because I don't think he should do it, and he never did it again. But he was so anxious that I meet this woman that he actually brought the woman to my house the next morning. And I said to him, Father, please don't ever do that again. But as I answered the door and I was introduced to this woman that I called Julia, again, not her real name, Julia says to me, oh, hi, Dr. Gallagher. Nice to meet you. And by the way, how did you like those cats last night?
Oh my
goodness.
She obviously either knew about it or, had she caused it or, who knows. But, it was clearly
instigated
something. It was something instigated. And, and I began to say to myself, well, what have I got myself involved in here? It's I'll tell you a funny aspect of this. She had, I as a psychiatrist, the priest wanted, her to work with a doctor, but a physician. But she had already been assessed by two psychologists, one of whom I knew quite well, and when I was talking to them, trying to find out more about her, they each told me that their cats had gone a little berserk too. So, this was quite a case. And this woman exhibited, trust me, some stuff that I observed. She exhibited quite a lot of, you might say paranormal powers. We would use the word preternatural, because we feel all paranormal stuff is either good or bad. So that there is, certain supernatural things that happen, like miracles, healings and that sort of stuff. And some people who, seems to have supernatural messages. But, we think the predominant, a lot of paranormal phenomena is darker, and those we call preternatural. So, what the modern term paranormal, it is a modern term from the 19th century. It really is talking about things that used to be called spiritual, as non-material, so that they were either supernatural or preternatural. And in Julia's case, she had what I guess a lot of modern people would say are these paranormal abilities, but we would say that they're preternatural. They were, you might say, gifted to her by, her own opinion was by Satan himself.
Gosh. So what else did you see her do? You said that you witnessed different things that she could do that were definitely of a paranormal variety. What else besides the levitation?
I know you two are knowledgeable about, this sort of thing, so you may have heard of something called remote viewing, which is where someone can see things at a distance. And she told me a couple of times that she was doing that, but again, I was a little skeptical. This was a little early on in my work with these individuals. And one day she said, I can see the exorcist, what he's doing right now. And, at this point, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I think I literally said to her, I had an informal enough relationship with her. Again, I wasn't serving as her doctor or anything. I said, okay, Miss Smarty Pants, what is he doing? And she said, well, he's walking along the beach, and he's saying his mumbo-jumbo prayers. I mean, she was referring to the prayers a priest says, what's called the breviary. And I said, and what is he wearing? And she said he's wearing a windbreaker. What color? Blue. A blue windbreaker and khaki pants, So I said, okay, well, I'm going to call him. Now, this guy was 100 miles away, and she hadn't had any contact with him, in a while. So I called him, and, he called himself Father A, and that's literally, sort of what he called himself to remain anonymous, and I call him that in the book. And I said, Father A, this is Rich Gallagher, how are things going? What are you doing? And he said, well, Rich, normally I would be at the rectory, at the residence, but I decided, it was a nice evening, I'd take a walk along the beach, a mile or so from where I live. He lived near, Long Island Sound is what it was. And I said to him, what are you wearing? And he said, who wants to know? And I said, Father A, just humor me for the moment. He said, well, I have my windbreaker on, what color? Blue. I have my khaki pants. And then he was a very intuitive guy himself. I think he did actually have some psychic abilities of a good sort. And he said to me, I know what's going on. And I said, what? He said, you're talking to Julia, right? And she's seeing me. And I said, that's exactly right. And so, that was again a lot. As you may know, the parapsychologists call that remote viewing. And she had, and she also knew a lot of things, sort of like a fortune teller. She knew how my mother died. She knew how a lot of people died. So she had this hidden knowledge. And when I would ask her about, how she got that, she said, this is why I'm a Satanist, because Satan gives me this abilities. I'll tell you one other story that's kind of striking. I had seen her go into a trance once, and this was outside of the exorcisms. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they only go into a trance when the priest commands the demon to manifest himself. But we were driving in a car and with the priest, and all of a sudden she was in the back seat, and all of a sudden, this guttural voice came out of her. No, it was clearly, what is a possession? A possession is where a spirit takes over the body and the brain and the consciousness of the person. They can't affect, what we call the soul. So the demon started speaking. It was using her vocal cords, but it was, the voice sounded different. In other words, it didn't sound like a ghostly voice. It sounded like, sort of some kind of male voice taking over her vocal cords. And it said, I'm not going to try to imitate it, but it was something to the effect like, we told you to leave her alone, you stupid priest. You stupid effing monkey priest. It's quite hostile. Now, that went on for about 5 minutes. And then she came out of it, and she had no recollection of what happened. I asked her about it. I said, do you remember what just happened? She goes, what are you talking about? Although she noticed that we had driven out of the city, and so the scenery had changed, and she said, how'd you get out of the city so quick? Anyway, long story short, a couple of weeks later, I'm at my home, and at this point, Julia had gone back to her home. She lived about 800 miles away, so we knew where she was. She was at her own home, and I was talking to the exorcist on my landline, and he was inviting me to come to her exorcism, which I actually never did go to any of her exorcisms, but I, from all the people who witnessed things, including her eventual levitation. And I'm talking to the priest, and all of a sudden, that same voice came in over the phone line. We told her to leave you alone, you effing priest. You're going to be sorry. And this is a very characteristic thing that they say, because they're trying to intimidate the priest. I mean, I was talking to the priest, not to me, but I heard it, and I said, Father, did you just hear what that voice said over the phone? Which of course was similar to the demon we heard in the car. And he said, yes, Rich, this is what happens in this dramatic cases. I mean, he thought this was a once-in-a-century case because it was a, case of a Satanist. So that is literally, sometimes people ask me about my reactions. Now, I'm pretty used to this stuff by now. But I will say that was the only time in my life people talk about, the hairs on the back of your neck going up.
Yeah,
I'm listening to this, and I'm feeling like my phone line, even my household, is being invaded in some way, and literally the hairs on the back of my neck went up, and that's probably the creepiest thing that ever happened, at least that I experienced. I mean, I've seen some remarkable things, but this was, in some ways, the only time in my life where the hairs in the back of my neck went up. I mean, by this point, I'm kind of used to seeing these, dramatic stuff that, people find literally hard to believe, and I understand that. I understand that.
Yeah, and for you,
I was going to ask if more women or men are possessed versus, or is it non-negotiable? They don't care. Either side?
Well, it's a good question you ask, because it is sort of a controversy. I mean, my own experience and the experience of a lot of exorcists is that it really doesn't matter. That many men, just as many men and women get attacked. There are other people who think it's more women do. And my own theory is, and maybe it's a little bit based on my, being academic psychiatrist, women tend to seek help better than men. So, for instance, women who are depressed are much more inclined to go to a doctor or go to a therapist. I personally think, that's one of the reasons why some people have the impression that more women are attacked. Admittedly, in my book, I write about a lot of women, but I write about men too. There was a gangster, that I write about who eventually was also delivered, and he also levitated, by the way. And, and obviously he was a male. But I personally do not, to me it's almost a little sexist to say, women are more vulnerable or something. I don't think that is. Could it be possible that, demons who are not male or female themselves, that demons in the teachings of the church at least, they're not male demons or female demons. Most people would say, they would have no particular reason to, single out women. But there are some exorcists I know who think for, God knows what reason, that sometimes there are more women that they see than men. Maybe just because women seek help more.
Yeah, or women's more vulnerable, they think.
Well, they may think that. I don't know. I don't think that myself, but they may think that. That's true.
Now, there's supposed to be some type of hierarchy with demons. There's some more powerful than others, is my understanding. So have you encountered that, or have priests shared information about that with you, that some of their hardest cases were because the demons were more powerful?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And, if you think about it, some human beings are more powerful than other people. Most people who believe in angels feel some angels are more powerful than others. And, I do ascribe, you can see from a lot of my beliefs, they're fairly traditional. I do believe that demons are fallen angels and that they have different abilities too. So, yes, I absolutely believe some demons are more powerful than others. And the more powerful ones, I think, are harder to get rid of. My own theory about Julia is that one of the reasons, and she had 8 exorcisms, and then, I think the main reason she wasn't delivered was because she didn't work at it and she didn't truly renounce Satan. You can't have your cake and eat it too, as we say. But on the other hand, I think she probably, being a high priestess, she probably had very powerful demon or demons. Sometimes there seems to be multiple demons, although I don't get caught up in that too much because demons lie so much. I don't necessarily believe, I've seen cases where they say there's 100 of us or something like that. Some of it seems to get ludicrous, probably based on lies. But I have no doubt that whatever demonic force was involved with her was probably more powerful than some of the other, characters, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talk about oppression versus possession. So can you give us a definition and so we can understand what each one really means?
Well, I mentioned before, the concept of possession implies that the demon has established definite control over the agency of the person. So they can, in a way, can act through the person's body, and they can even take over the consciousness so that the person may wind up in a trance. Oppression are all sorts of lesser attacks. Now, they can be like a physical attack, like Maria, and trust me, I've talked to literally hundreds of people over the years. Now, again, this is over 30 years, who have come to me and said, demons punch me, choke me, scratch me, push me, flip me up in the air. Are all those stories true? Well, I think most of them are credible. That doesn't mean that somebody couldn't be making it up or imagining it or something. But I have no doubt, and some people use a different word for that. Sometimes they'll use the word vexation, a physical attack of a demon on a person, but the demon never controls the person. That's one type of oppression. Now, the other type of oppression is like what happened with that woman who was having these very, very powerful messages in her mind, you might say. That was another type of attack. I call that, other people have different terms for it, I call that an internal oppression. And that's where demons seem to have some ability. Again, it's always limited. It's not like demons can do whatever they want. They're constrained in their own way by God's providence and God's protection, and but they do have some ability to attack human imagination, human senses, human memory. I'll give you another example. A woman in the book I talk about who was a housewife. I call her a housewife from West Virginia, a rural area, but again, her name and her location were not correct, but everything else in my story about her was correct. Now, she, as a young woman, had gotten involved in some ritual satanic practices, and that's why she got possessed, presumably. And when I first met her, people would tell me, including her husband, that she can hear fine unless you're talking to her about some kind of religious subject. So, for instance, if you said to her, Catherine, did you go to the store this morning? And she said, yeah, I went to the store. I bought some, potatoes and bread. What else did you do? Well, I put gas in the pickup truck. They had a pickup truck. So, but if you said to her, Catherine, did you pray today? Or Catherine, did you go to church? Or Catherine, did you, how is your faith in our Lord? She could not hear that. She just couldn't hear it. And she'd look at you quizzically like, what are you saying? I don't hear you. And I remember I went to attend one of her exorcisms, and I went with a psychiatric colleague of mine. So, and we both came up with a bright idea. Well, since she can't hear us, why don't we write down on a piece of paper questions, and she could maybe write back the answer or say the answer, because she could speak.
Yeah.
So,
good idea.
So we wrote down a question. Catherine, what did you do this morning? And she said, well, this morning I was out in the back with the kids, and we sat around. I wasn't feeling so great. She often started to feel bad when the exorcism was about to start. And so then we said, and we wrote down on this piece of paper, Catherine, are you able to pray at this point? And I remember the sort of pained, hurt look on her face, and she looked at me and said, Dr. Gallagher, why did you show me a blank piece of paper? So remarkably, the demons were affecting, as I said, they can affect, sort of what people think in their brain at times, at least to some extent. And they can also affect your senses. They can take away. Again, it doesn't happen in every case, obviously, but in this woman's case, they could take away her hearing. They could even take away, or very selectively, her sight, because it's not like she was blind all the time or anything, or it's not like she couldn't hear mundane things. And the reason, we surmised why this was happening is because if you think about it, if she couldn't hear anything of a spiritual or religious nature, nobody could really give her spiritual advice.
Right.
And so it was the demon's way of keeping her from getting any, religious, spiritual advice and support. and that seemed to be the motive that the demons had to interfere with her sense of hearing and sight very selectively. Now, there have been other possessed people who cannot hear at all. You know, I mean, I think even in the Gospels there's stories about, you know, people who are possessed who were deaf and mute that were healed with a exorcism by, in this case, I honestly believe, by Jesus.
Yeah. Gosh, and so what happened with this lady? Was this all taken care of by the exorcisms that she went through?
Well, you know, I've seen enough cases in my life, this is going to sound strange, that I don't follow up with everybody, you know. Mm-hmm. I had heard at some point that she was doing better, but I don't know what the ultimate outcome was. You know, I just, you know, look, you know, yeah. I see a lot of these cases, but I also have a full-time career as a psychiatrist and a teacher and a professor. So, you know, yeah. There's only 24 hours in the day, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, these stories are just so fascinating, and of course we'd like to hear that there is a happy ending more than not, so I always ask.
There are a lot of happy endings. I mean, in the book Demonic Foes, if I can mention the name again, which you know, is easily available by Amazon. I don't say I liked writing the book, but you know, I found it worthwhile writing the book because so many people had asked me to do that. In fact, everything I've done, you know, whether it's write articles, eventually we're making a movie, join the International Association, get involved in the first place. Everything I've done, I've been asked to do. I'm not sure that this is a good field to volunteer for. But having said that, HarperCollins published my book, and I was delighted. You know, it's the second biggest publishing company in the world. I was delighted that they let me write the book I wanted. Now, you know, all these stories I'm telling you today, or most of them, are in the book. And, you know, so I tried to make, you know, the book interesting. But it's a very serious book. You know, I mean, some people think it's a little too serious because, you know, the point was to, you know, write it to different audiences. I've had many exorcists who tell me the book is helpful for them, many clergy, and, you know, other people who, you know, think they may be attacked, but, you know, maybe need to think about whether, you know, they have dissociative problems or something like that. So some people, I find it helpful personally, and the public often finds it very interesting just to hear about this and hear about the implications of this stuff, because quite obviously, you know, if one comes to examine the evidence, which I think is very, very much greater than most people think, if one looks at the evidence just very objectively, you know, I think one becomes more and more convinced that you know, this is something people have to think about and recognize the forces of good and the forces of evil in the universe. I'll tell you a funny story. You know, I'm not shy about talking about this subject. Obviously, I'm talking to your large audiences right now, right. But you know, over the years, I mean, you know, I'm a doctor. I mean, there are plenty of psychiatrists who are skeptical because, you know, they see so many people with mental problems who kind of imagine this or, you know, have hallucinations of evil spirits and stuff like that are, you know, medical problems. And, you know, I've obviously dealt with hundreds of those individuals too. But, you know, in general, you know, people don't truly realize that over history, even though it's rare in any individual situation, and it has often been confused with a medical problem, admittedly, on the other hand, there's just tremendous evidence for this stuff throughout history. So people, who I think would be interested in this sort of thing, probably would find a serious book on this subject, fascinating.
It is
Definitely.
fascinating. It's very well written, and I highly recommend it. I know you do too, PK, to our audience.
Definitely.
We'll be talking about this beyond the show for sure, Dr. Gallagher. And you've created a bridge. Oh, you're so welcome. And you've created a very important bridge here between the science of psychiatry and these things that are happening that usually fall under the heading of paranormal. And it's so needed. It's so necessary. I mean, if you think about the people that have gotten help through being evaluated by you and finding out, they don't have a psychiatric issue, they have a spiritual issue, and here's how to get help. I mean, that's so vital. That's so important.
Or the reverse. They think they have a spiritual issue, and it turns out to be psychiatric. So, yeah, I mean, the way I put it, Patricia, is, there is no contradiction between my position as a doctor and a scientifically trained person, and these beliefs, spiritual beliefs, and actually the mainstream, Western tradition has always emphasized that both faith and reason, go hand in hand. So, and also when people say, well, how does it feel to be out of the mainstream? I say to them, what mainstream are you talking about? I mean, most people in America believe in evil spirits. Most people in the world, I mean, there are areas of Europe and the United States they're very secular, but most people in the world believe in evil spirits. My book was published, for instance, in Japan, where there's a great deal of interest in evil spirits, even though it's a non-Christian country. So I say, maybe people who question me, they're the ones out of the mainstream.
Perfect
Dr.
answer.
Gallagher, do you find that a different nationality may tend more towards this than others?
Nationality? Is that what you said? Well, I mean, yes, I think there are certain cultures that are more interested in this, or maybe they are a little more superstitious than other ones. I don't want to stereotype any particular group, but there are certainly cultures throughout history that have exaggerated this stuff, that have sort of like the witch hysteria of a couple hundred years ago. I mean, there were real abuses. Even in America, there are people who think there are Satanists all over the place and they control the government, and we had a lot of what we called false memories of people who were, tortured or ritualized sexually by, these legions of Satanists around the world. You have to realize that some people do have false memories of this stuff. And number two, there are other people who have written bestsellers, or at least reasonably well-selling books, that just make up the stories. So, I mean, I tried to give a sober account. On the one hand, I want people, as C.S. Lewis used to say, to be aware of this, but, not to be preoccupied with it or see the devil everywhere, which is another danger, In terms of, say it again?
I said good, legitimate information to keep us on par with what's really taking place.
Yeah. You have to have a balanced view about this. And again, I remain a scientist. You have to look at the testimony of people, see if it's credible. Sometimes people who are religious fundamentalists will say to me, "Well, I'm sure you don't believe in evolution or the Big Bang, right?" And I say, "No, I think God used evolution. That's the way human beings developed, and I definitely believe in the Big Bang theory. So you can have a scientific mentality and still believe in this stuff."
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's so much history to this. Also, this is you have so many historical accounts of things that have happened through the years. This whole subject is fascinating, and what I'm so heartened by is that people can get help, and like you said, in one direction or the other, either the spiritual help they need or the psychiatric help they need. Either way, you've opened up a doorway so that people can find out. I mean, you know how to evaluate patients and see if it's one or another. You know how to tell the difference, and that's incredible. Now, are you teaching other psychiatrists? Because you are also on the teaching staff. Are you teaching students and other psychiatrists how to recognize actual possession or oppression?
Well, first of all, I don't want to give the impression like I'm the only psychiatrist in the world who believes in this stuff. I know many, mental health people, psychologists, psychiatric nurses, and other psychiatrists, including, a number of friends of mine who believe exactly what I do. I've just been more outspoken about it, and therefore I've probably seen more of these cases than any other physician in the world. My academic chairman, who was a Catholic himself at one point, former chairman, he said, you may have seen more of these cases than any doctor in history, which is probably true, because now we have Zoom and the internet. Now again, I teach psychotherapy, I teach psychopharmacology. Now, when I teach those subjects, I don't get into this, there's a place for everything, right? And, it's not like I'm trying to hit people over the head with that. So I do a lot of teaching about, the history of psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, the value sometimes, judiciously of using psychiatric medication. It doesn't really come up because it's not my role as a professor of psychiatry to teach that. On the other hand, I also, part-time, I teach at a Catholic seminary, the Catholic Seminary in New York. And at that seminary, I teach a course in this. In fact, anyone with a college degree, and I mainly teach it to the future priest, but anyone actually, with a high school, with a college education, can sign up and pay the tuition and be a member of my course, because we also do it by Zoom. So yes, I do some teaching of this, and I don't do it every single year, but every couple of years I'll have the course, and it tends to be a very popular course.
I bet.
I would assume so.
Gosh, where can people sign up for that? Which college is that one?
Well, it's the Catholic Seminary in New York. It's called St. Joseph's
Catholic
Seminary.
Okay.
And they would have to contact the. It's like a graduate program. They do require a college degree. Mm-hmm. So, but people could get in touch with the Catholic Seminary in New York and ask about signing up. I think I'm going to give the course not this year, but next year. Yeah.
Super.
Wonderful.
Oh gosh, well, Dr. Gallagher, this time has gone way too fast with you. We're almost out of time. I can't believe it. This has been great. Again, the name of the book, everybody, Demonic Foes, My 25 Years as a Psychiatrist Investigating Possessions, Diabolic Attacks, and the Paranormal. Make sure you get a copy. Oh, my gosh, this has been great. Well, Dr. Gallagher, we can't thank you enough for being on the show with us. We've learned so much tonight, and it's been very exciting.
Definitely.
Yes.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and you're obviously both thoughtful interviewers. So it was a pleasure talking to you again.
Oh well, thank you so much.
Us.
Do you have a book too in the works?
Well, I'm mainly working. I'm executive producer on a Hollywood movie. And
excuse me. Okay, well, that's where your energy's going next.
That's taking up a certain amount of my time, and
I bet
it's being produced by what's called Blumhouse. That was a guy,
I know
Jason
Blum.
Blum.
Yeah.
And he got very, very intrigued with the book, and especially the character of Julia, the Satanic Queen. So probably in a couple of years you can go to the theater and watch the movie The Satanic Queen.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on that, and please keep us posted on your further endeavors. This has been wonderful.
I suppose it's a little bit in the category of careful what you wish for, but we're trying to put out a credible movie. Yeah, it's not going to be a preachy movie. It's just going to be a drama of the real life story of Julia, the Satanic Queen.
Well, Blumhouse always does a good job. It's a big name in Hollywood. So congratulations and best of luck with everything. Please keep us posted. Let us know when your movie's going to come out. We'll promote it on the air. Not that it's going to need promotion. I'm sure it's going to be huge. So
it's
thank
a deal.
you. All right. Thank you, Dr. Gallagher. Good night.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks,
good luck to you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for another radio adventure with Supernatural.